This story is shared for educational and awareness purposes to highlight the hidden dangers of emotional disconnection in marriages and the devastating consequences of unchecked emotional bonds outside the relationship. The truth is, I never saw myself as the kind of woman who would even consider such a thing. My life was built on a foundation of predictability, of school runs and grocery lists, of knowing exactly what brand of coffee my husband Mark preferred. We were a portrait of comfortable stability, or so I thought. The cracks weren't dramatic. They were subtle, almost invisible, the kind you only notice when the light hits them just right. And for me, that light was a man named Daniel. It didn't start with a dramatic moment or a bold confession. It started with a quiet, growing loneliness that had settled deep in my heart. Mark and I had become skilled roommates, experts at coordinating schedules and running a household, but we had forgotten how to truly connect. Conversations were about logistics. Who was picking up Liam from soccer? Did we pay the electricity bill? What did we need from the store? The deep talks that used to last for hours. Curled up on the couch, dreaming about futures and places we'd visit, had long since faded away. He was buried in his work, and I was buried in the life we had built together, feeling more and more like a caretaker of a home that no one truly noticed anymore. I met Daniel at the community center. I'd started volunteering there a few afternoons a week, helping to organize a local art exhibit for aspiring artists. He was one of them, a sculptor. I remember walking into the main hall and seeing him there, covered in a fine layer of clay dust, completely focused on a twisting, abstract form taking shape under his hands. He wasn't classically handsome, not like Mark, but there was an intensity to him, a presence that filled the space around him. He looked up, caught me staring, and smiled. Not a polite, passing smile, but a genuine, warm one that seemed to say, "I see you too. What do you think?" He'd asked, gesturing to the sculpture. "Is it a triumphant rise or a painful descent?" I remember blushing, caught off guard by the question. No one had asked my opinion on anything beyond what to make for dinner in a long time. "I think," I said, stepping closer, "it depends entirely on the person looking at it." That was it. That was the first spark. Our conversations became the highlight of my week. We talked about art, yes, but also about books, about philosophy, about the quiet longing for unfulfilled dreams. Daniel listened to me in a way Mark had stopped doing years ago. He listened like my words mattered, like my thoughts were valuable. He made me feel alive again. He made me feel truly noticed. The first time we met for coffee outside the community center, my stomach was filled with a mix of guilt and excitement. It was just coffee, just two people talking. But I knew, deep down, I was crossing a boundary Mark wouldn't even think to notice. Daniel shared about his past failed marriage, about the isolation of his art, about how he felt like he was always searching for a deeper connection he couldn't quite find. I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't with anyone. My fears that I'd lost myself in being a wife and mother, my quiet frustrations, the dreams I'd set aside to gather dust. It was emotional, completely emotional. But the heart doesn't always draw clear lines, does it? That emotional closeness became something I craved. Every message from him was a rush of energy. Every conversation eased a loneliness I hadn't fully admitted to myself. I started to keep things private, clearing messages, saying I was running errands when I was really meeting him for a walk in the park. The small deceptions came easily because they protected this new, vibrant side of myself I saw reflected in his eyes. I told myself it was harmless. We hadn't even held hands, but the desire was there. The longing was there. I was pouring my emotional energy into him, taking it away from my marriage, from my family. I was creating a hidden world, and with every step, the distance between me and Mark grew wider and deeper. The guilt was a constant, quiet presence. I'd look at my son, Liam, with his trusting eyes, and feel a wave of shame so strong it would take my breath away. I'd watch Mark watching TV, completely unaware, and part of me wanted to reach out to say, but another part of me was drawn to the attention, to the feeling of being appreciated and understood. It all reached a turning point one Tuesday afternoon. Daniel had finished his piece for the exhibit, A Crossroads. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the family photos on the fridge, my heart pounding. This was the moment of decision. To step back into my life and try to repair what was strained, or to step forward into the unknown. Okay, honey, don't be long. Daniel's studio was a small, cluttered space smelling of clay and turpentine. His sculpture, now complete, was breathtaking, and he was nervous. He poured me a glass of wine, his hand slightly unsteady. We made small talk for a few minutes, the air thick with everything unspoken. Then he took a step toward me. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle, "I can't stop thinking about you." This was it. The moment I had both feared and imagined. His hand reached for mine. His touch was warm, a spark that traveled up my arm. And in that moment, with his fingers brushing mine, I saw it all with sharp, frightening clarity. I saw the deep pain in Mark's eyes, if he ever found out. I saw the confusion on my son's face. I saw the complete destruction of the life I had built. This wasn't a rise in connection. It was the start of a very painful descent. I pulled my hand away quickly. "I can't," I whispered, the words tearing out of me. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I can't do this." The look on his face was a mix of hurt and acceptance. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and hurried out of the studio, into the cool evening air, breathing deeply as if surfacing from water. I drove home, my hands trembling on the wheel, tears streaming down my face. I had almost crossed the line. I had almost risked everything for a feeling. I walked back into my house, my safe haven that I had so recklessly endangered, expecting to see Mark still on the couch. But the couch was empty. The laptop was closed. And I found him standing in our bedroom, holding my phone in his hand. His face was a mask of profound hurt and quiet anger that froze me in place. He looked up at me, and his eyes, usually so warm and familiar, were distant and unfamiliar. "The bookstore, Sarah," he said, his voice low and steady. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He held up my phone. A notification was on the screen, a message from Daniel. It must have arrived while I was driving home. It read, "I understand, but my feelings for you are real. Please don't shut me out." I stood there, frozen in the doorway, my purse still on my shoulder. The world seemed to shift. All the air left the room. There were no words. There was only the heavy silence and the broken pieces of my husband's trust scattered between us. The emotional bond, as deep as it had become, ended before it could go further. But the fallout, I realized with a sinking dread, had only just begun, and I was no longer in control. The response to my actions was not going to be loud or explosive. It was going to be quiet, deliberate, and completely overwhelming. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument I could have imagined. It was a tangible weight in the room, thick and oppressive. Mark didn't raise his voice. He didn't lash out. He just stood there, looking at me as if seeing someone he no longer recognized, someone who had disrupted his world. His eyes, usually full of quiet warmth, were now flat and guarded. He looked from my face to the phone and back again, and a deep, cold realization settled over him. "Mark," I finally whispered, my voice breaking. It was a plea, a desperate attempt to bridge the gap that had just opened between us. He didn't respond. He simply placed my phone down on the dresser with careful precision that was more unsettling than any outburst. He walked toward me, and I stepped back instinctively. He didn't seem to notice. He moved past me, out of the bedroom, and down the hall. I heard the back door open and close. He was going to the garage, his retreat, the place he went to work on old radios and think alone. I stood frozen, my heart racing like a trapped animal. The guilt was no longer subtle. It was overwhelming, loud, and immobilizing. I had done this. I waited for him to return, to confront me, to demand answers, to react in some way. But he didn't. An hour later, I heard the door again. I crept out to find him in the kitchen, preparing a sandwich. His movements were precise, automatic. He didn't look at me. "Mark, please," I said, my voice shaking. He finally turned, and the expression on his face took my breath away. It wasn't rage. It was a deep, profound disappointment. "Explain what, Sarah?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. The message was pretty clear. You weren't honest with me. You were with him, and that was it. That was the start of his response. It wasn't a heated confrontation. It was a slow, icy distance. It was the complete, unbreakable barrier of silence he built around himself. He didn't ask for details. He didn't want to know how long it had lasted, if it had gone further, if my feelings were strong. His lack of questions was the harshest part. It meant that, to him, the fact of the betrayal was all that mattered. The details didn't change anything. I didn't matter in the same way anymore. He moved into the guest room that night. He did it without discussion, simply gathering his pillow and blanket while I sat on our bed, crying. The sound echoed through the house, through my heart. We smiled and discussed homework and weekend plans in front of our son, our performance so convincing it was unsettling. But the moment Liam was out of sight, the atmosphere in the house turned freezing. Mark would answer direct questions with single words. He stopped sharing meals I prepared, choosing to eat separately after I'd gone to bed. He removed himself from our shared routines with quiet, precise efficiency. I tried to apologize. I wrote him letters, pouring out my regrets, explaining the loneliness, the emotional distance, pleading for a chance to rebuild. I left them on his desk. The next day, they would be shredded. He looked at me for a long moment and then said I was overwhelmed by my own regret, and he refused to even acknowledge my struggle. He was going to let me face the consequences alone, in a space he controlled, with no forgiveness, no closure, just ongoing, silent consequence. A month into this difficult period, I came home from grocery shopping to find him in the living room, not with his laptop, but with a stack of papers. He looked up as I entered, and for the first time since that night, there was a hint of something in his eyes. "We need to talk," he said. I sat down on the edge of the armchair, my hands clasped tightly. "Of course, anything." He slid the stack of papers across the coffee table toward me, a detailed, carefully organized budget. Groceries, Liam's tuition, his soccer fees. "I've reviewed our finances," he said, his tone like a consultant addressing a client. "Given the current circumstances, it's clear we need to make some changes." "Okay," I said, confused. "What kind of changes?" "Well," he said, leaning forward and pointing to a line item. "You're volunteering at the community center. While it's a worthwhile activity, it doesn't contribute financially to the household. With Liam's expenses rising, we need to optimize our income. I've taken the step of finding you a position." I stared at him, stunned. "A position?" "Yes. A colleague manages a data entry team at a logistics company. It's entry level, routine, but it pays. It's a standard 9 to 5, which means you'll handle school drop-off and pickup. Your schedule is outlined here." He tapped the paper. This wasn't a proposal. It was a decision. He was financially limiting my choices, removing the one area that had been mine, my time, my independence. The volunteer role that had, ironically, introduced me to Daniel. He was methodically reshaping the life I knew under the cover of practical necessity. And he continued, his voice steady and courteous. "I've opened a new bank account. Your salary will go there. You'll cover 40% of the mortgage, all groceries, and Liam's activities. I've calculated everything here. It should leave you with just enough for personal needs." He was restricting my freedom, not entirely, but significantly. He was making me reliant on an income he had arranged, keeping me occupied, scheduled, and accountable to him. It was clever and completely unrelenting. Tears welled in my eyes, but I held them back. He wasn't worth my tears anymore. The man I married had changed, replaced by this calculated, detached figure. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered. He finally met my gaze, and a small, cool smile appeared. It was the first smile I'd seen from him in weeks, and it sent a chill through me. "Doing what, Sarah?" he asked calmly. "I'm supporting my family. I'm ensuring our financial security. These are the duties of a husband and father." "Isn't that right?" He was echoing my own past complaints about his emotional distance, turning them back on me. He was not just responding. He was reflecting the very dynamic I had resented, showing he could fulfill his role perfectly, just without warmth. I took the spreadsheet. My hand was unsteady. "Fine," I said, my voice surprisingly firm. "Good," he said, standing up. "Your orientation starts on Monday. I've already arranged it for you." He left the room, leaving me alone with the stark numbers that defined my new reality. The emotional connection was over, but my consequences had only begun, and I knew with deep certainty that this was just the beginning. Mark was just getting started. The data entry job was its own form of challenge. A windowless office, the constant sound of keyboards, the draining repetition of entering data for 8 hours a day. It was exactly what he'd planned, a consequence framed as responsibility. I came home each evening exhausted, my energy depleted. Mark's cool courtesy never changed. He was the ideal, efficient co-parent, the responsible homeowner, my unwavering overseer. The final step came on a Tuesday, the 1-year mark of my near crossing of the line. He called me into his study, a space that had become his planning area. "Sit down, Sarah." His voice carried a new, decisive tone. He slid a single sheet of paper toward me. It was a real estate listing. "Our house. I've accepted an offer." "A strong one," he stated, his eyes showing no attachment. "Closing is in 30 days. The air left my lungs. "Our home? Mark, you can't. What about Liam's school? His friends? I've already enrolled him in a new district." "A better one," he replied, leaving no space for argument. "I've also secured a new role for myself, a major promotion in Seattle." The world seemed to spin. He had planned everything, every careful detail, while I'd been occupied in my workspace entering data. He had waited patiently, building his plan unseen, for the right moment to make his final move. "And me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He finally looked at me, and for a brief moment, I saw the raw satisfaction in his eyes. This was his complete response. "You made your choice a year ago, Sarah. You stepped outside this family. I'm simply making that choice permanent. The divorce papers are with my lawyer. You'll be served next week." He stood, the discussion finished. He had taken everything. My comfort, my time, my home, my daily life with my son. He hadn't raised his voice once. He had simply, methodically, and legally removed me from his future. His response was not impulsive. It was a carefully executed plan. He had prevailed. I was left with nothing but the lingering weight of my own serious mistake, and the sobering realization that the quietest responses are often the most thorough.